This is Let's Talk Iowa, a podcast about the gap between Iowa's policies and the families living through them. Thank you for tuning in. Here in Iowa, families like mine are fighting through a broken mental health system. Let's talk about it. What if getting your child the help they need meant risking everything: your home, your voice, even custody? I'm Chad, an educator, adoptive parent, and someone who's been navigating Iowa's systems for over a decade. I've lived this, and I know I'm not alone. I've seen the good, the bad, and the parts no one wants to talk about. On this show, we'll bring those parts to light. I'll tell the truth, no spin. I'll talk with families, providers, lawmakers, and people living through the consequences of broken systems. Because stories change policy, and because Iowa families deserve better. Let's not stay silent. Let's talk Iowa. Today's guest is someone who represents what this podcast is all about, telling the truth about what families in Iowa are going through, especially when the systems meant to help them fall short. Nina Richtman is a mother from Des Moines who faced an impossible choice. After exhausting every therapy, every program, and applying to 21 residential treatment centers, only to be denied by every single one of them, she found herself out of options. Her son was in crisis and she feared for everyone's safety. In the absence of accessible care, Nina was forced to do something no parent should ever have to consider: transferring legal custody of her child to the state just to access the services he so desperately needed. I first connected with Nina over the phone during one of the most desperate points in my own journey, a kind of scavenger hunt for help, dialing anyone who might understand what I was going through or show me how to navigate Iowa's patchwork of systems. Talking to her was a blessing. It was one of the first conversations where I realized I wasn't alone, that other families were struggling just like mine. That phone call planted the seed for this podcast. Nina's honesty, her strength, and her willingness to speak up when so many families suffer in silence. That courage inspired me then, and it still does now. I'm incredibly honored to welcome her as my first guest on Let's Talk Iowa. Welcome, Nina. Nina, you have a very, very powerful story, and I was hoping you could just kind of dive right in and get us started.
Well, my story starts about 14 years ago, and I went through the foster care training and got licensed as a foster parent in Iowa and started getting calls. Particular call that I got was from a caseworker who was trying to place a sibling set, and the kids were 2 and 3 at the time. And when she called me, she said, "How are you with hyper kids? Because these two are really hyper." I didn't have any kids before them, so I didn't really have anything to compare it to, but I'd babysat and I had cousins and I had younger siblings. So I thought, yeah, aren't all 2 and 3-year-olds hyper? What I realized very quickly after saying yes and having these guys come to live with me is that they aren't hyper so much as they're hyper vigilant. So they're constantly looking around at everything in the environment, and they're always testing their surroundings, and they never really relax. And so that was what I think made them really different. It made them seem hyper maybe to some people, and they definitely had a lot of energy. So these guys came to me when they were 2 and 3. They seemed, I guess, like typical 2 and 3-year-olds, but I pretty quickly figured out that there was more going on than just your typical 2 and 3-year-old, because they got disenrolled from daycare pretty quickly. And at the time, I didn't really understand because I didn't know that the behaviors were that discrepant from their peers. But yeah, we had to.
What kind of behaviors are you referring to?
Um, so one of the examples that I can remember really clearly was they were saying that one of my sons was swearing a lot at school in daycare, and I hadn't really heard him do that. So I thought, not a big deal, right? Just tell him he can't do that. But I think what he was doing was he was looking for a reaction from the adults. And so he learned really quickly that that gets a reaction. So that was one of the things. And my other son, he was biting, and I'd heard that that was pretty typical toddler behavior. So I asked some more questions about it, and what they said was, well, he bit another kid, but he looked right at the staff person as he bit down on the arm. And when we told him not to, he didn't stop. And they kind of implied that that made him like a bad, evil child. But I see it through the same lens that I see all of it, which is he's looking for attention from adults. He's checking to see, are adults paying attention? And what I think my kids figured out early on is that negative attention is better than no attention.
Mm.
And I think in their early life, they just didn't get consistent attention. And so they just learned to take any attention that they could get. But that's really problematic, right? And so that's why
Right.
we were having so many problems in daycare.
So, early life, my wife and I adopted from the foster care system as well, and information for us was kind of patchy on what we received, and what was verifiable from the biological parents. What type of information did you receive when you were doing this about the biological family? Was there any indication of these special needs or behaviors or anything like that?
It was really sparse. All I knew was that they were hyper, according to her. That was really the only descriptor that she used when she
Mhm.
described them. And then they were with another foster family, so I was able to go and meet them. So I was able to get some information from the other foster family about what how they acted and what their behaviors were and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But it was pretty minimal. So
Okay.
I was just going into it, just kind of seeing how it was at my house and working with that. Yeah, so my ex-husband and I, we dealt with infertility, and I just really wanted to be a parent. So at the point where we were a couple years in and we hadn't had success, I started talking to him about adoption or foster care or something. And he said, okay, go ahead and just research whatever you want to research and then come back to me and tell me what you think. So, of all the different options that I researched, I like the idea of foster care the most because it was helping kids in my own community. So I really just wanted to be a parent in some capacity. I didn't go into it necessarily thinking that I would for sure adopt, but these guys were actually the first placement I ever had, and they stayed. So they're the only kids I ever fostered because their needs are very high. So I was
Mhm.
never able to take on any more kids after I had them.
Right. Yeah. No, your story is very similar to my wife and my story. We were dealing with infertility as well at the time, and kind of doing. We were doing in vitro treatments
Oh, yep.
simultaneously as we were pursuing adoption. And so we went from 0 to 4 in a matter of 9 months because we had twins biologically, and then we adopted our two my oldest son and daughter from
Oh,
the foster
wow.
care system. So I feel like there's a lot of similarities there again, just kind of the motivation on why some parents choose to get into
Mm.
helping the foster care system, and looking out for children in that circumstance. And I feel
One
like,
thing,
go ahead,
if I could mention it, Chad, that
please do.
I researched a little bit before I got into this fostering world is about attachment. A friend of mine was going through an international adoption and she had read a bunch of books and was telling me about it. And I think that attachment is a huge part of this that a lot of people really don't know about going into it. It's not something that I learned about in foster care classes,
No.
but it's a really big deal because every foster or adoption situation is built on a loss. And so all of
Yes.
these kids are dealing with a fractured or damaged or not a strong attachment to begin with in some cases. And so they're all having to work through that loss and that attachment. And that really became such a huge issue for us throughout the course of the 14 years
Hmm.
is my kids just fundamentally do not trust adults because they have been hurt by adults.
Right.
And so it's every day it's about showing them like I'm going to be here, I'm not going anywhere, and no matter what, I'm staying around. And it's just a lot of because of attachment, it's just a lot of on their side like testing and rejection and tough stuff, but it's really all rooted in the attachment. And they have good reason to not trust me as an adult because they've been let down by other adults. So
Mhm.
I'm just on a mission to prove to them that I'm not going anywhere.
How do you feel loss played a role in maybe even your own journey into the foster system? 'Cause I just feel like there might be something there as well, even on my end.
Yeah. Well, I think it's um, in my experience with it, because their behaviors were so challenging right from the very beginning. There
Mhm.
was the loss of this idea of having kids come and just having this really incredible bond and this really nurturing and reciprocal relationship.
Mhm.
And so I had to make peace with that early on. And I continue always to try to keep that front of mind, because as a parent, there is a certain level of loss, at least in my experience, with just sort of the complexity of their needs, that uh, they are not easy kids to love. And I'm committed to loving them, but there's a lot of like push away from adults caring for them. So there's that loss, I would say, as a parent. But I think for them, and this is what I always try to keep in mind, is their loss is astronomically larger than my loss. And so that's why I can have compassion for them, because they lost, not fully, because their parents are still involved in their life to a certain extent,
Okay.
but they lost their family of origin. And those were the
Mhm.
people that are the most rooted and grounded and critical in their day to day for, their prenatal and their early life. And so, no matter what challenges came with that time for them, that's still who they know and who they've always known. And so, that's a gigantic loss.
So I guess you dove in, right? You accepted these two bundles of joy into your house. You
Yep.
had these grand plans of this ideal family, and I say that just because I feel that that's what I had, and I think a lot of foster and adoptive parents kind of go into it with that mentality, right? Like we're helping somebody, we're going to have this family. Can you walk us back to that beginning and just kind of guide us through more of you noticed that your sons had these needs.
Mhm.
Where did that lead?
Well, just thinking back to like the first couple weekends, we did a transition between the foster family they were living with and my house. And first couple weekends, they really didn't sleep. I could not get them to sleep. And I had set up a bedroom for them. They were going to share a room. It had toys in there, it had all kinds of stuff. And oh my goodness, that was me being very naive, because I could barely get these guys to settle down and sleep for even a couple hours a night. So the toys came out right away. That wasn't going to work. And basically, I just ended up pivoting over and over again. So, like, what ended up kind of working was to make the entire room into a bed with blankets across the whole floor. And I had to sleep with them, and basically just had to like lay there and keep telling them, like, guys, it's time to go to sleep. It's time to go to sleep. And it was just, I mean, I think that's when I realized after a couple weekends that it was just so different than babysitting or siblings or cousins or any of that, because I mean, these guys did not sleep. They were just like energizer bunnies. And I do think that it really had to do with that hypervigilance, is
Yeah.
they didn't trust their surroundings. And so they weren't going to sleep, because that would be a bad move if you're trying to survive in a new environment. So I realized pretty early on that it was going to be tough, and it never actually got easier. It just sort of evolved over time into different things. So one of the things, one of my guys, he was 2 when he came, and when he was 3, he could get evaluated for a special education plan. And so I had him evaluated at 3, and he did qualify for it for behavior and for some academic components. So that was really good to just get that early on. And my other guy, who was 4 when he first came, he already actually had an IEP. And so that was a good hint to me, like, okay, you should look into this. So that was helpful in trying to figure out how to get them supports. So I realized pretty early on that their needs were going to be more complicated than the average kid. And I had chosen a daycare because they were associated with a provider agency, thinking that that would be a good option because they may have special needs. In the end, that didn't really make them more tolerant of the behaviors. They were just more equipped for kids with physical disabilities. I filled out a checklist when I finished foster care class, and it said, "Do you want to take kids with mild needs or moderate or high?" And I checked mild because
Hmm.
it's like, well, this is my first placement. I should probably, start with somebody that's got less intense needs. And now reflecting back on it, I don't think that piece of paper means anything because I don't know how your experience was, but they didn't even call for like the ages that I put on the paper. They just called for everything.
Right. I don't think mild means what they think it means.
No, it doesn't mean anything. So, because now it's like, okay, these guys were tough, but but I think it's maybe good I didn't know right away because if I had heard like, oh, these have very complex needs, I would have been like, oh no, not for me. So
And I think that ties to an overwhelmed system because I we kind of did the same thing. My wife and I, we mild. You know, we were both teachers. We figured we could deal with some mild behaviors, mild needs. Um, and then we were getting calls for sibling groups of five with you know severe physical needs. And we are like, whoa, whoa. We said mild. Like we only have 3 bedrooms, so we're not sure how we're gonna do five. But yeah, and I think there's a lot of conversation that can be had around just that sheet of paper, right? With the needs that kids have and the difficulty that caseworkers have in trying to find appropriate placements. I'm impressed that you had IEPs at that age. As a teacher, I don't feel a lot of parents are aware that they can get that testing at those younger ages. What led you to that? How did you know that was an option?
Well, my older son, he had an IEP when he came to me. So that's when I first learned about IEPs. And he was going to, he was getting like a preschool service with it. So that was great because then you could kind of see it in action and they would update on the goals and things. So I thought, hey, this seems very good. So I asked when my other guy could be evaluated, and they said when he turns 3. So I really credit it to whoever it was that got my older son into special ed when he was probably 3.
From what I'm hearing right now, you knew there were some needs. You got them some IEP services. Did you feel like it was helping? Was it enough?
No, it wasn't enough. So they got kicked out of daycares. So
Hmm.
then I had to find another option. And I found this amazing place that's the Children and Families of Iowa Child Development Center in Des Moines. And they had a classroom that was for kids with behavioral and emotional special needs. And I can't remember how I found them, but I found them somehow. And it seemed like a great fit. And their caseworker at the time cautioned me because she's like, well, if you choose that, then you're putting them in an environment with all kids that have a bunch of needs and that they might learn more bad things. And I was at the point where I was like, okay, we got to do something because we're getting kicked out of daycares and I need childcare because I work full time. I'm
Hmm.
not going to be able to stay home with these guys. So I just figured it was a gamble worth taking. And it actually was a really, really good experience for them. Yes, they were with other kids that had similar types of needs, but in a way, I think that kind of normalized it for them. They weren't always the guy who got in trouble, which I think was a good thing. So they went there until they both were 6 when they started kindergarten, and they both there were 2 different classrooms, and they both ended up in at different times in the classroom of an amazing person named Stephanie, who I have to do a shout out to because she made my whole life possible. So she was their teacher then, and then she provided childcare for me after they graduated from her class, and has helped me all throughout the years, and is really very skilled with kids with trauma and is a special ed educator by training and just has been a godsend and a lifesaver.
A
So,
guardian angel.
yeah, for sure. So they went to kindergarten when they were 6, which I have no regrets about that either because they're developmentally delayed. So I think it was helpful for them to be just a little bit older when they went to kindergarten. And yeah, they had associate support, one on one associate through school, which I think was really critical because, again, like I was saying, they don't trust adults. So having somebody who can consistently be there, that knows them, that they can build that trust with, I think that was important. And school has always been a challenge for them. They have some academic goals and behavioral goals. So, just a variety of challenges. I think school was hard. They both have intellectual disabilities. So, just a struggle.
Hmm.
But I do think that the associate support made a big difference. So, special ed services, absolutely critical. I cannot even imagine without it.
Yeah, and I think that the associate is huge, and it's not as common as I feel like it needs to be with
Yeah.
students and children in these types of situations. And so it's good to hear that your sons were able to benefit from that. So they're going through school. You're having kind of behavioral issues here and there. I'm assuming at school and at home. Did it ever? Was there a point where it just like ramped up, or was it always kind of a gradual increase, or did it just kind of maintain?
It was just maintain. I mean,
Hmm.
it changed sometimes what the behaviors were over time, but there was always an intensity. So people said to me, other foster parents said to me, some days you just feel like it's survival, and then there'll be other days that are easier. Nope. It
Yep.
always felt like survival to me every single day. And my favorite day of the week for a very long time was Mondays because Mondays was the day that they weren't in my care 24/7. Somebody else was with them for part of the day, which gave me a break.
Hmm.
So I always thought of Mondays going to work was a great thing. It's like, okay, yay, I don't have to take care of kids. So
And your coworkers probably looked at you strangely because they're thinking, "Oh, it's Monday. I'm not ready for this."
yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say that it was like you were describing earlier that a lot of people in my world, I didn't really take the time to explain it to them because
Mhm.
I don't think they would have understood. So it was easier to just save my energy for other things. That's why it's always great to be in community with other parents who have
Oh,
had similar challenges because we don't really have to explain it to each other. We just get it.
100%. Um, Now, these types of situations are difficult because not only are you dealing with trying to help your child, but you're trying to maintain your professional life. You're trying to maintain, your home life. Did you have a huge network of support around you that could like lend a hand, or was it just you and your ex husband having to take care of everything?
Yeah, so my ex-husband, he actually didn't adopt the kids, so he
Okay.
fostered with me for the first year, and then we separated at that point.
Okay.
And since he didn't adopt them, I had sole custody of them, so that is kind of the dynamic of our situation.
Hmm.
So in terms of a network, I do feel like I had a good network of people, friends in church, but what I would say the network was helpful for was more just kind of support for me or community for us. So it was like other people to do things with, but it wasn't so much like alternative care providers because most people could not handle the behaviors. So it was more like I would do things with my guys and then have others come along. And that was great. I had no complaints about that. It's just you don't really get a break in that
Right.
scenario. So I did have Stephanie, who was the babysitter extraordinaire, and she was able to watch them sometimes. And then probably when they were about 8 and 9, I was able to get respite care through the Children's Mental Health Waiver. And so then they started going to Camp Sunnyside and got respite 2 times a month for that, which was a really wonderful break once that was an opportunity. So I would say in terms of like actually having time off, it was, you know, being having Stephanie or having the respite care. But I'm really grateful to my community for just being with us as we did all the things. That made it feel a lot less lonely for me, and it was good to have people kind of witness some of the challenge, and also sometimes they're better behaved when other people are around, and so that was nice too.
How did they respond when those people were kind of around them in their life? And I know you were
Yeah,
there
so
and you were around, but how'd they do with
yeah,
with that?
So here's the thing with attachment issues, and you may have seen this with your kiddos, maybe not, but they don't really they don't pick up on the typical cues. They don't follow like a typical pattern. So when there's new people around, they automatically put all their attention on the new person, and they're like overly friendly with new people. They want to sit on the new person's lap, they want to talk to the new person. And from what I understand about learning about attachment issues, it's really a survival strategy because you have to make sure the new person is safe. You have to win over the new person. And just in case your primary caregiver would abandon you, you got to have options for who could take care of you. And so it's sort of a genius move, except it's maladaptive. But
Hmm.
it's sort of brilliant from a survival strategy. But as a parent, it's really strange because I spent a lot of time trying to teach them about social norms, like, hey, you can't walk off with that guy at the grocery store, or you can't sit in
Hmm.
somebody else's cart, or you can't go sit on that person's lap, like trying to teach them social norms, because to them that's just what they gravitated towards, was anybody who was new or different or interesting or they hadn't seen in a while. And then what's also really complex about it all is like one of my sons is very shy, by like his true nature is very shy. He doesn't talk a lot, he doesn't share a lot, and that's how he always is with me. That's how he is with some people that have been around a little bit longer in his life. He's pretty quiet, but if you met him, he would talk your ear off. Like today, he would talk your ear off. And that's just how he is. He's always been that way. And it's a skill that he's developed. And I just had to not be offended by that. Like,
Yeah.
okay, my kid loves everybody else more than me, but that, I understood it. So I wasn't really offended by it. But it's strange. And I'm guessing some parents who maybe wouldn't know about attachment issues might think like, this kid hates me, but I don't think it's that. It's just the new people have a pull.
I chuckled during that just because when my daughter, when we first were doing foster care and the caseworker brought them to our house, the very first thing she said to us is "Mommy, Daddy," and
Yeah.
came running and gave me a hug, and 20-something-year-old me at the time was going, what? Like,
Yeah.
you can call me Chad if you want. And that was my first introduction to those attachment reactive attachment disorder. And so it was an interesting experience. But that was kind of the same story. They would go to anybody and hug, and they were best friends right away.
Yep.
And yeah, that survival. I like how you phrase that, a survival technique, right? If they like you, they're going to take care of you, hopefully, right? And
Yeah,
so
exactly. And one thing
yeah.
about that I think is actually been really positive for them is that because they are both like that, they win people over pretty easily. And so in just being in community with people, especially when they were younger, like they were very pleasant to be with. Like people wanted to hang out with them because they were always game to try something new. They wanted to hold the new person's hand. They made the new person or just the people we were hanging out with feel very wanted and part of the group. And so in a way, like it was really nice, and I think they won a lot of people over, and like our community felt very positive about them, which I'm glad for.
That's huge, yeah. And it kind of it's those moments where for me I felt good, like the teachers would say, "Oh, she's so cute and she's so
Yep.
nice," and you just feel good. You're like, "Oh, man, wow, right, yeah." Because sometimes I feel like when you're dealing with the behaviors frequently,
Yep.
it's easy to lose track of those good times, those good thoughts, those good
Yeah.
experiences. What were some of the difficulties that kind of came that led you to kind of seeking out more community services?
Okay, so yeah, one of the things with one of my sons is that he can go from 0 to 100 in like 5 seconds. And so we were at a point where he would rage. I call it rage when he does that. Once, twice, sometimes more times per day. And we were just in a holding pattern where every day that would happen. And he would scream obscenities. He would say insults to me, say insults to his brother, tell me all the ways he was going to kill me. Now, I want to clarify for your listeners that I did not take this personally. I know that this is not him. This is not who he is. This is a dissociation. And so what I would see with him is he would do these things and I would just sit with him because if I talked to him, it would make him more mad and it would prolong the rage. I would sit with him. And then once he calmed back down and he went back to his normal self, he did not remember what he had done. It was like he was in a completely different place. I truly believe that he did not have any recollection of what had happened. And so I figured that out pretty early on and with the help of his therapist. And so we would debrief after he was calm again, just to talk about what had happened. But I never belabored any of the words he used or any of those things because I really don't think he was connected with his own brain. And he definitely wasn't the same he didn't seem like the same person at that time. And so where I went for more help was when we got into this holding pattern of every day this kind of rage would happen. And every day I would sit with him and get him to calm back down. And then the same thing would happen the next day, and the same thing would happen the next day. And it was just exhausting because nothing changed it. We always had that same pattern. And what I was told by his therapist and was gathering from books I was reading and other parents I was talking to is this is what you have to do. You have to just be present and wait for it to pass. But I felt like it was really negatively impacting my other son because he was listening to it every day. And I just felt like my kid was stuck, right? Like he couldn't, this was his pattern and nothing was disrupting his pattern.
Well, that had to be somewhat emotionally challenging for your younger son.
Yeah, yep.
Did it spark any negative behaviors on his end, or was he able to kind of separate from that?
Well, I'm not sure. It was hard because he can't intellectualize it in the way that I can and say, okay, I understand that this is him dissociating. I know he doesn't mean this. So I would just try to get them in separate spaces and get my one kid set up with something to do and then try to go help the other kid just to separate. I definitely tried to explain, like, so the words I used with my guys was he lost control of his mouth or he lost control of his body. And so I would just say he just lost control of his mouth. Like he didn't mean what he said. He was just really feeling a lot of anger. And so he said mean things, but he didn't mean them. And so I don't know if that helped, but that's the best way I could think of to explain it to him at the time.
Right, developmentally appropriate language.
The thing I was going to say about it was that was also during the pandemic. So that made it extra challenging to find any real help for him. And we were spending a lot more hours together every day. So I think that was when I first started thinking about a PMIC placement, the intensive therapeutic residential treatment for kids in Iowa. That's when I first started thinking about that. I didn't want to because of attachment issues. I didn't feel like sending them away was a good choice. But I was also between a rock and a hard place with not very many services during the pandemic. And then this situation where every day was the same day in and day out and just very intense.
Yeah, I my son went through some issues around that same time, and for people who aren't aware, can you kind of explain like what was it about the pandemic that made services harder to find exactly?
Yeah. So before the pandemic, I calculated it out, and my family was receiving on average per week 59 hours of formal community supports. So that was school, that was respite care, that was therapies, and every bit of that went away. So people need to imagine like if you had that much support and then all of a sudden you have to work and take care of your kids and there's not any break. That's what I was up against. And so it was a really big shock to the system. And it made me realize how much I relied on those formal community supports, especially school. It was really hard to not have school. And my guys are not good with technology. They're not good at being able to stay on task with that sort of thing. So we didn't even attempt virtual learning because it would not have worked for them. So
Hmm. So you're exploring these options of a PMIC, and did you have help in that process, or were you navigating that solo?
Well, I had an IHH worker who was a case manager with the Children's Mental Health Waiver. She was kind of trying to help,
Mhm.
but I mean, she was great and nothing bad to say about her, but I think it was just like a little bit beyond the scope of her work. So she didn't have a lot of information. So what I did was I just started looking up the different PMICs and then getting their applications, and then I asked around to different people I knew to see if anybody knew if some were better than others, and then I applied. And another thing that I found out at that time was that they had IQ requirements. And so my guys had not had IQ testing. So I had to get IQ testing for them, and then found out that their IQ was lower than some of the admission numbers for some of the PMICs. So that narrowed it because some wouldn't accept them because of their IQ. So it was a lot of trying to figure out that sort of thing, and then realizing, oh, you got to get this other test done in order to do this step in the application. So one of them had a low enough IQ that he qualified for another type of program called ICFID, which is for kids with intellectual disabilities. And so then actually the insurance company gave me a case manager at that
Mhm.
point, and I learned about ICFID that way through that case manager for my one son. And then for my other son, who was also having a lot of challenges at that time, he did not have a low enough IQ to go to an ICFID, but he did qualify for two of the PMICs. And so I applied to those two PMICs. He got into one of those PMICs. And then my other son got into an ICFID. But just to let your viewers know, this is a very long and gray process, and it was incredibly stressful because every one of these places has a different admission process, and the timelines are very unclear. So you apply and then you wait, and they don't tell you what the admission criteria is. And so sometimes you get an admission interview, but that still doesn't mean you're in. That just means they're deciding on something that you don't know what they're deciding on, and they'll let you know later. And it's very crushing when you're hoping for something and then without any information about why they tell you, yeah, we haven't chosen your child for this spot and we have very limited spots at our facility, so you can try
Mhm.
again in a year or something. It's just it's really hard. And so that's what all was happening at that time. So they did both eventually get in someplace, but it was a rough couple months trying to navigate all that.
I'm impressed you did it in a couple months. How many different facilities did you apply to?
I applied at that point in time to two
Two there.
ICFIDs
Okay.
and uh, two PMICs.
And they got in, and was it close to home? Was it far away?
They were both kind of far away, but it could have been worse. So
Mhm.
one was in Cedar Rapids, that was the PMIC facility, and then the ICFID facility was in Council Bluffs. And
Okay.
I live in Des Moines, so
Keep guiding us through this. So you've found they have placements. They're receiving services.
yeah.
Things seem to be
So
looking up.
yeah, well, what I would like to share with the viewers, because it's an important part of my story, is I my one son went to a PMIC, and my other son, we were still waiting for still another maybe like 6 weeks, and I was experiencing suicidal ideation at that point. I held on for as long as I possibly could, but I was very emotional and I couldn't stop thinking about death. And I did not want to die, but I was in a state of despair because the pandemic and this application process was so incredibly exhausting. And actually, on the night before I checked myself into a hospital, I had received a call from one of these facilities, which I was holding out hope for. And they said, "We're not taking your child." And that was such a crushing blow at that point in time, because you hold on to tiny bits of hope, and the hope was gone. And I was so exhausted. And so I work in mental health, so I knew, okay, I'm not okay. I have to go check myself into the hospital. And when they took my blood pressure, it was 220 over 100, and so they immediately admitted me. That's how much anxiety I was experiencing at that time. But here's the catch: I had to bring one of my sons with to the hospital. And if you bring your child to the hospital, they told me, we're going to have to call the Department of Health and Human Services if you don't have anyone who can care for him. But the fact of the matter was, that's exactly why I was there, because I didn't have anyone else that could care for him. I had people that
Right.
could take him for a couple hours, but I didn't have people that could take him for a couple days or a couple weeks. And I was just not okay. And I knew it, and I couldn't keep going. So they admitted me and they took him to an emergency shelter. And that started a process for us that lasted for 9 months. And we were involved with the juvenile court system in Iowa. And it was by far the worst experience of my life, because parents are vilified in the system, even when you're a parent like me who went to the state for help saying, I can't do it. I'm not okay. I
Trying to do
still
all the
went
right
through,
things.
yeah, I did all the right things, but I went
Yeah.
through the same system that every other parent that ever has been involved in the child welfare system went through. And it was really eye opening. My life has forever changed because of it. I've always been a person that can use my voice to get me in and out of things. And my voice didn't matter. I didn't have a voice in the child welfare system. And it was a terrible experience. And it took 9 months to get out. I was only in the hospital for 4 days, but it took 9 months to get out of that system. And I had custody of both of my kids and all of that at the end of it. That never was really something that they were going to take away, but it just took so long to get out, because the only way out is through. And they make you go through the same hoops as everyone else. So, for example, I had to go through parenting classes. And the parenting coach that I was assigned had never had any kids that had any special needs or any mental health issues. And she was teaching me how to parent. And as your viewers can probably hear, and as I know you know so incredibly well, parenting our kids is a different beast. And so when you have somebody who has parented neurotypical kids who is telling me how I need to try and parent my kids, it is it's so frustrating. And then she would report to the court if I didn't do what she said to do. And there were so many issues, but I just wanted to illustrate that one in particular, because in terms of parenting, it was just pointless. But you can see why they have the service, because maybe some parents do need that. But it didn't look at my case as an individual case in any way. It put me through the same system as absolutely everybody else.
There was just a standardized approach
Yep.
to the steps of the system, and there was a complete disregard to any kind of individuality present
Mm.
in a case that is unique. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
every case is unique. That had to be a tough pill to swallow, especially being taught by somebody who hadn't done it.
It was, I mean, the attorney that represented my kids she was not professional, and she was very ruthless. And so she would make accusations like, mom is not visiting, mom is not calling, mom is not paying, mom is not providing clothes, or none of that was true, right? So then the attorney that was representing me had to follow up with documentation saying, no, mom is doing all these things. But there were no checks and balances for what that attorney could say in court. And so she painted a picture of me that was not fair in any way. She said, this mom doesn't want her kids. This mom is trying to get rid of her kids. And the judge has to make rulings off of what's presented in the courtroom. and what's presented to her in paperwork. And so it was just a lot of work on my attorney's side trying to make sure that I was portrayed in the correct light. And I couldn't help as I was going through it, but think about, I'm me. I have a lot of resources. I worked in mental health. Um, what if I had a disability? What if I had a criminal record? What if I was poor? What if I was black or brown? My experience would be far worse. And it was the worst experience of my life. And I can imagine it just crushing somebody because it's not fair. It's a system that's set up that parents are guilty until proven innocent. And
Hmm.
I didn't even do anything wrong. I just asked the court for help.
Well, and you just not even asking the court for help. You just asked your healthcare provider
Yeah, yeah,
for
true,
help. You
exactly. I
know,
asked
yeah.
DHHS for help, and
Oh, yeah. That I like the way you phrase that. Just the hypothetical eyes, right? What if I wasn't in the situation I'm in? What if I, had any number of other factors in light? And especially
yeah,
the inside information, right? Working within healthcare, you have a little bit of an edge, and I sometimes
yes,
have that with education. Working with an education, I understand a little bit more about IEPs or what mandatory reporting, things like that, where I have a little bit of an insight. But
hmm,
it's not an all inclusive, extensive knowledge, right? So there's still kind of those situations that you'll find yourself in. I'll find myself in that. Even working in the field or similar fields, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of
hmm,
unknowns. So going through that emotional toll on yourself, reaching out for help only to kind of be met with this, um, I don't know how you say that, harsh reality of the current
yeah,
system, where to me it almost seems like a kind of a weaponization of a system that's
yes,
supposed to help you.
yes.
How did you come out of that? Did it make you stronger when you were all the way through? Did it just kind of crush
Um,
you? What was that like on the tail end of it?
well, I will tell you, I took a new job and I moved out of the state because I was so fed up and done with Iowa. So
Hmm.
but then a year later, I came back. And when I came back, I got organized and I started working on a project around accountability for the system, trying to understand how to hold the system accountable for the lack of professionalism and just this all of the trying to take my experience and do something positive with it. So that was a big project that I worked on. And one thing that I started as part of one of the tentacles of the project was I started a support group for families that are involved with the juvenile courts. And it's a virtual support group. And we've been meeting now. We're going on year 3, and anybody who's involved with juvenile courts is welcome to come to the support group. I felt like when I was involved with the courts, that was the most stressful part about it, was that nobody in my community understood, because it's such an atypical experience to be involved with the juvenile courts. And especially as like a really high functioning parent, it's just a strange track to be going down. So I wanted to start something for any parent that was involved in the system, just to come together, because they keep us isolated from each other. And really what we need to be is in community so that we can support each other, because it's a terrible experience.
Hmm.
And so that's something I've been doing for a little while, just to I felt like if I didn't do it, nobody would, because nothing like that existed when I was going through it that I knew of.
It's not everybody's first instinct to put themselves out there. There's a lot of people that would just kind of turtle up, right? Go into that
Mhm.
shell, protect themselves, because putting yourself out there kind of you relive that pain at times, right? It's
Mhm.
not gone, nothing's cured. It's just different, and so
Yeah,
very commendable on you. Going kind of back to your story, you went through that 9 month process. You start
yeah.
this group. What's next?
Well, I investigated a lot of different avenues through the policy side, trying to look into accountability through the agency that some of the players involved in my case had been involved with, just to make sure that people understood my experience. Because again, I felt like even though I didn't have a voice when I was involved with the child welfare system, the juvenile courts, I ultimately, I'm an advocacy person. And so I felt like people need to understand how horrendous this was. And so I didn't want any of the players in the system and their leadership to not know about my experience, because I felt like people needed to understand this is what happened. What they chose to do with that was up to them, but I didn't want anybody not knowing. And so I told my story to anybody who would listen to my story about this. And what I tried to understand was just what the channels of accountability are for lack of professionalism in the system. And it turns out that there are not a lot of checks and balances within the system, especially for guardian ad litems, the attorneys that represent the kids. So I looked into other states to see what other states were doing, and I got some ideas around some things that could be done in Iowa. And then also, there was some legislation that was passed, I believe, in 2023. That was a bill that was introduced by DHHS, and that actually had some changes to the requirements for guardian ad litems. So, for example, guardian ad litems now have to submit a report to the court, which is a vast improvement, in my opinion, from what it was when I was involved this time around in 2020 and 2021, because this attorney could say whatever she wanted to the court. She wasn't submitting anything in writing. And so it's a good thing to have something submitted in writing.
So at that time, it was all verbal. They just
Well
showed up.
verbal.
They just said everything they wanted to say. And then
Yep.
was there a court recorder that was taking this down, or was it just
Yep.
more of an
Yeah,
informal
there
setting?
was. But here's what I learned is you have to pay money per
Oh, geez.
page to get a copy of that. And it's expensive. It's like $3 or $4 per page
Oh.
to get a copy. And so, I mean, I looked into everything, and it was an exhaustive couple of years. I did this in a lot of my free time
Hmm.
just because I felt so passionate about the need for change. And ultimately, at the end of it all, I pursued a lot of channels, but there's not a lot of easy ways to make change in this space. So
No.
that's why I'm just going to keep telling my story for forever, because we need change in this system. And yeah, I feel like that's the thing I can do at this point. And I work in
Well,
the field as well. So it's something professionally that I can also work on to a certain extent.
I think your willingness and your experience, as difficult as it is valuable to share, and that's the only way that things will change is if the people that are making these decisions hear it,
Yep.
right?
Yep. I think so
And
too.
actually listen, not just hear it in passing, but they actually take the time to try to understand what happened.
Hmm.
So during this time, was there any impact on your kids' services, or any impact
Yeah.
on them that
One
was negative or positive?
So one thing I want to share, because it was positive, and I think we need more of that in the world, is my son who went to an ICFID facility. That was actually a really positive experience for him. And I think the reasons that it was positive for him was, one, there was more than one caregiver. So there was, 3 or 4 or 5 staff that rotated throughout the house on different days at different times. And I think for a guy with attachment issues, I think that was a positive thing to have multiple people in charge and not have sort of the inherent stress of trying to bond and attach and be connected with one caregiver. Another thing for him was he had never really fit in. He'd never really had friends. And I think moving into an ICFID facility with 7 other kids, it created a community for him. And because he was one of the more high functioning kids in that facility, it made him a leader in a way that in his real life, he was not a leader. So I think that was
So he had
positive.
success. He had
Yeah.
success, and that's what everyone wants to feel, right? So that's, I mean, that's an
Yep.
amazing story that for your son to experience is, you know,
Yeah.
he was a leader. And how
Hmm.
great is
Yep.
that?
And then the other thing that was really positive for him was his school situation. He was in a therapeutic classroom for most of his core classes. And so it was a smaller group and it had a lot of staff, and that was very positive for him. So I think for one of the first times ever, if not the only time ever, in his schooling, they met him where he was at and they really focused on where are you at, meeting him right there instead of trying to get him to grade level with a lot of supports. And so he was in seventh grade and he was doing times tables. And he came home one day and he had 100% on his test. And it was like 3 times 4 and 5 times 6. And he was a seventh grader. And that's, not the right age that you would typically be doing that. But he'd never mastered it, right? And it's a foundational skill. And so I love that they just gave it to him and taught it to him. And he didn't know that most seventh graders aren't working on that because of the therapeutic classroom. They got him that life skill, right, of knowing the times tables, and he felt good about himself. So it's been a positive for him.
Wanted that put up on the refrigerator right when you got home,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. For sure.
Well, that's awesome. So when you say therapeutic classroom, can you kind of explain a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, so my understanding of it is it's around 12 students and then 3 or 4 staff people, a teacher, and then some associates are there as well. And it's the same kids that are there for as much of the day as they need it. So he was doing all of his core classes, like his language arts, his math, his science, his writing, all of that was happening in that classroom. But then I think what's really nice about it is then he can do some of his elective classes. Like he really likes PE. So he can do that as a mainstream course in Gen Ed, and he doesn't have to do that with the small group. And then the other thing that was nice about that for him was that he could do sports as part of the school. So he was where he needed to be for academics in order to do well, but then he also had opportunities of being in a larger school.
Right, and for the social aspect, right? Yeah, that sounds like a really good setup.
Yeah, yep. So shout out to Council Bluffs.
There,
They seem to have a good program.
there we go. We'll have to get somebody from there to come on and talk about it. Things progressed from here, and eventually you reached a point where you had to give up custody in order to obtain services. Can you kind of talk about what
Yeah,
led
sure.
to this point?
So this was with my younger son. My older son was the one that went to the ICFID
Hmm.
facility. And my younger son, he did a short stint in the PMIC, but it ultimately was not a successful experience for him. And I think it was because of the type of behaviors that he has. PMICs are set up, I think, for kids that are having acute symptoms, like maybe they're experiencing suicidal ideation repeatedly and they can't stay in a hospital anymore. They need a longer term care option. Maybe kids that are aggressive, maybe violent towards others. Some of those type of behaviors are more what they're typically set up for, is my understanding. Something that is harm to self or others, kind of in that category. So that's never been my kid. His behaviors are much more subtle. He struggles with things like theft, elopement, hiding, defiance, things that are much quieter, things that you're not necessarily going to pick up until it's kind of problematic. So they did admit him for those behaviors. That's what I wrote out for them. But ultimately, they really only measured his success on whether he was aggressive or not, which was really disappointing because he didn't come in with aggression. So they said, oh, he's doing great because he's not aggressive. It's like, well, he's never been aggressive. That's not the problem here.
He had
So
100% on
ultimately,
that
it came
before
down
entering,
to,
and he has 100% now. We're good.
yeah, exactly. So I think that is a problem with PMIX, is that they all measure success in their own ways, and ultimately it didn't measure anything that was useful for him. And so the insurance company said, we're not going to pay for this anymore, which I think was fair and reasonable. My only issue with that was they discharged him very quickly. And so then he came home and we had to get him reintegrated into everything. So this was 2021, and he did outpatient services, and we tried all the things we could moving forward that were more outpatient in scope, because that's really all there is in Iowa is
Hmm.
outpatient services and then PMICs. There's nothing in between. So we've been doing that for years and haven't really seen an improvement in behaviors. And one of the behaviors that became more of a problem for him, especially in the last year, is fire starting. It's a scary behavior. He is very good at taking things. Theft is one of his big issues. And so he was finding fire starting materials and then he was bringing them home and then he was lighting things on fire. And so I was finding burned stuff. So I tried everything that I possibly could to keep the fire starting materials out of the house. And it got to a point where I was doing as much surveillance as I could, and I could not keep the fire starting stuff out of the house. So after the third time that he started a fire, then I basically knew that we needed help. And something to note prior to that, that point in time where I realized we needed help, I had tried to apply to programs that might help him that were therapeutic residential treatment options. So a couple of PMICs in Iowa that were maybe a little bit more tailored towards the type of behaviors that he was exhibiting, or that I had heard from people, other families that had been positive for their kids. So I applied to a few of those, and then I applied to some out-of-state programs that I had heard good things about. There's a program specifically for attachment issues. I tried applying to that one. But this was May of 2024, and I had heard no from some of them, and I hadn't heard anything on a decision from some of them when the fire starting came to a head where I just couldn't keep him at home because of the safety issue. So then the insurance company recommended that I apply to every PMIC in Iowa, regardless of whether it was a fit or not, and every external out of the state program that they worked with, apply to all of those. So that was 21 total. And in the end, every single program said no. So I basically was out of options because he couldn't be at home and no program would
Safely.
take him.
Yeah.
So
And I think that's important to point out. He couldn't be at home safely, right? I mean, it
no,
wasn't a matter
yeah, he
of,
couldn't.
I just don't want him at home. It was a matter of he couldn't be here safely.
Yeah, I could not keep him from starting fires. So I had to, in my mind, there's a lot of behaviors, but most of them were not deal breakers. But the fire starting was one where I couldn't risk it
Well,
for him or
it's just,
for me. So
exactly. It's just as dangerous for you as it is for him, and
yeah,
he doesn't understand that more than likely.
no. And to clarify, so that everybody understands, I don't think he has any ill intent around fire. I don't
Hmm,
think he's trying to hurt somebody. I think he's very fascinated with fire and he thinks it's really interesting and he's very impulsive. And I don't think he understands, even though I've told him and other people have told him, that a fire can get out of control really fast when you're playing with fire in the wrong place.
right. I mean, because how many of us haven't sat around a campfire at some point and just
Oh yeah,
stared at the
fire's
flames, right?
fun. Fire
It
is
it
fun.
is, and for a
Mhm.
kid who doesn't have a brain that operates in the typical way, um,
Yep,
they don't have that ability to say, oh, fire is pretty, but it shouldn't be in my bedroom floor, right? Like,
exactly.
and
Yep,
so you reached out to 21 different placements,
yep.
and I if it was like it was for me, it's 21 different, completely different applications.
So it turns out, I found this out only after the insurance company told me to apply to every place in Iowa, that there is a universal application for all the PMICs in Iowa. So any parents that hear this, ask for that because there is one application you can fill out. Now, I will tell you that one application asks for everything under the sun in terms of documentation. So it is not an easy application to fill out, but at least you don't have to fill out 7 different ones.
Right.
So for the in-state ones, there was one application, but the out-of-state ones do require you to fill out different information. But at a certain point, the case manager for the insurance company took that over
Mhm.
and applied on our behalf. And so it wasn't as burdensome as it sounds. It was upfront because I didn't have that level of support, but at the point where we were trying to apply for any and every place, they were helping at that point. So
Yeah, it turns into kind of a game of they fill it out, they send it to you, you sign it, send it back. So
yep.
it lessens it as long as you remain in constant communication, right? It can be very helpful. So
Yep.
so you're denied in all of these settings.
Yep.
What do you do next?
Okay, so I contacted Kelly Garcia, the Department of Health and Human Services director, and she knows me because I have been in contact with her before through my professional capacities and my case in 2020 and 2021. I was communicating with her at that point. So I said, Kelly, I have done what I can. I need the department's help. And what I've been told is that there's only two real options. There is a China, which would mean that the courts get involved and he goes into state custody. Just for your viewers, I didn't say this to Kelly, but I said a China. Or the other option that the team was providing to me as an option was that he could go into an adult group home, and they make exceptions for kids who are 16 or 17 sometimes, and he could be supported through an adult group home. Now, then he would stay in my custody. I did not feel okay with that option because I knew this kid needed treatment, and that is not an avenue for treatment. That's just a place to live.
Yeah.
So I said, thanks, but no thanks. That doesn't seem like it's going to solve any problems here. And he's starting fires. It's serious. We can't have him going into just a general setting with people who aren't expecting this level of behavior. So what ends up happening then, which is really frustrating, is in order to get a China initiated, you have to prove to the state that you are essentially a bad parent.
Mhm.
So I had to say to the state, I am not going to drive him to school anymore. He was in a crisis stabilization program at this point. I'm not going to drive him to school anymore, and I'm not going to provide his medications. Now, I'm not a bad parent, so I gave them a long list of here's all the providers. Here's when he's got all medication refills available. Like, this is the pharmacy. I gave them every bit of information I had so that nobody was going to be in an emergency situation because of this decision I was making. But I had to do that because they don't take you seriously if you don't do that, because it's the way the system's set up. So I can't just say I am out of options, I need a China, and they'll pursue that. They basically told me you can't ask for that. So then I had to take action, which makes me look like a negligent parent, so that it initiates their system. And so that's what I did. And then they investigated me because I wouldn't pick up my kid and I wouldn't provide his medication. And eventually they determined that it was a founded accusation that I, couldn't care for my kid. So to me, this is a really maddening part of the whole process, is that I have a founded child abuse case against me. It's not an allegation. Like, a social
Mhm.
worker deemed it founded, but that's what I had to do in order to start this process. So that meant that we were then court involved because they remove him from my custody because it's founded that I can't care for him. And I think the parties involved understood my situation. So I didn't feel like I was being as penalized in the same way as I was in the time in 2020 and 2021. But still, it's a weird situation to be in because you're basically, having to prove something to a court that you're
That's
really
not
just
true.
asking for help. It's just a different way of
Mhm.
asking for help. But it's a huge suck on resources to put families through this. The By him being involved, by him being in state custody, he can go to what's called a QRTP placement. And it's a group home that has some therapy involved with it. It's definitely not a therapeutic residential placement, but it's, the way I can describe it is, it's sort of like the best of the bad options.
Yeah.
So I had no other choice really, because if I wanted him to be in some kind of residential program that had a therapy component, this was it. This is all that there was. But the catch was he had to be in state custody in order to have that happen.
So all doors shut, and the only way to open a door was to manipulate
Hmm.
HHS's own system
And
against
they knew I
you.
was going to
Yeah.
do it, and there's no other way. So
Oh, that's just it seems so illogical. It seems like we could do so much better
yeah,
for
yeah,
parents, for kids. I mean, everyone involved.
it's really terrible, and that's the way they do it. So then we were involved with the courts. He went into the placement. And then, unfortunately, what happened after that was a couple weeks later, he made some choices and did some behaviors that got him some charges. And so then he was arrested and he went to juvenile detention because of those behaviors. And he's a highly influenceable guy. So he did have a co conspirator, a roommate that I think some of the behaviors that he got charges for are they're things that are completely atypical for him that I've not known him to do in the past. So I would argue that he was highly influenced by his roommate, but some of the things that he did are things that he has done in the past. So I'm not saying that it was completely out of the realm of behaviors that he has done. But what I find so frustrating about the system is that for many years, these behaviors were incidences that were documented and by community providers, by me, and we couldn't get any help for them. And then all of a sudden, he's involved in the juvenile justice system and he's just locked up for them. And it still doesn't help kids get better,
No, there's
but
no therapeutic
unfortunately
approach
now he
there.
has a record because of it, and it's the same behaviors. There was some that were new, but some that were similar to things he'd done in the past. And so it's just I mean, I've been advocating for him for so long, trying to keep him out of the juvenile justice system, because I don't think anybody gets well in jails and prisons. And he I mean, these behaviors just landed him right there. So he's now, since then, he's cycled in and out because he got out. Then he accrued more charges, again, because of behaviors that he has a documented history of doing. But now, because he has some charges, everything leads to more charges. So
So
he's
are
in a
these
really sticky
behaviors?
spot.
Yeah, are these behaviors? Are they taking place in a therapeutic setting?
Yeah, so it happened at his facility for the first set of charges, and then for the second set of charges, it happened at school in a therapy group. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
That has to be
so
even
it's
more
hard
frustrating.
because
Yeah.
I see them as the same tough behaviors, trauma. These things are rooted in trauma. He has a trauma history. It is, he's been in therapy for it for years, and these are trauma behaviors, and they are unresolved, right? And
Mhm.
so now the world expects him to behave himself because he's involved in the juvenile justice system. And that's all I've been hearing for the last 6 months is all the players, the professional players in the system saying to him, you need to behave yourself. And the reality is he can't behave himself. That's the
Right.
whole deal. That's why I was trying to get him into any of those 21 places, because he needs help and
Mhm.
he cannot manage his impulses, and he needs skills so that he will be able to handle peer pressure. And he those things for him right now, he can't do it. And so it's a setup for him to just keep getting in more and more trouble if people expect a different outcome with the kid who does not have those skills yet.
My mind goes back to when you were talking about the times table test that
Yeah,
he came
yep,
home with and he was so proud of. Right, I did good. Well, I mean, if his teacher at the time had just said, "Well, you need to know these. You
yep.
just learn them. Come on, learn them." And
Yeah,
then he
yeah,
gets a
exactly.
question wrong, and then they take away every recess for a week. Well, I can almost guarantee he wouldn't come back with that test saying, "Hey, look how well I did." Right? And it seems to me that that's almost a parallel to what the experience your son had in that last hope setting was. Well,
Mhm.
just do better, do better. And
Yep. Yep.
then he messes up, gets it wrong, and okay, well, jail. And then
Yep.
gets out
Yep.
and okay, do better, do better. And the cycle repeats. And it just doesn't seem like the answer.
No, that's exactly right. You've got it right.
So I guess moving forward, I'm grateful for all your advocacy work, and I know we've talked on the phone previous to this, and shared a lot of our stories with each other, and you've been a big inspiration to me, I'm just really impressed with the work that you've done. Um, what is something that you wish a legislator, a group of legislators, policymakers, something you wish they would just get through their heads that they would just do?
Yeah, so I think they need to build out the system to have a comprehensive continuum of care. So right now what we have is we have like weekly outpatient things, and then we have PMICs, which are intensive inpatient, right? So what we need for kids like ours is something that's in the middle. Something that has staff that are well trained, that understand trauma, that understand disabilities, that understand mental illness, and they can take kids and do more intensive outpatient work with them, kind of like, maybe some options for like more school programming that is more like the therapeutic classroom or therapeutic school. Something that's maybe like a day program like they have for adults, where kids could go there if they need to for, let's say, up to 12 hours a day or something like that, where they have staff that can work with them and they have a safe place, and it, is something that's supportive. And I think that's really needed for parents to be able to sustain this, because it's such an intense level of care that our kids require. And one thing that I always found to be very, very difficult is that anytime anyone couldn't manage my kids, they would call me and say, you need to pick him up. So my guys were suspended a lot. They got sent home from programs. They got kicked out of programs. And it's very stressful as a parent when you feel like your options are evaporating away, and it's kind of the responsibility is closing in on you to be your kids everything. And the reality is, like, these guys are intense. They have very complex needs, and so no one human can be everything for them. And developmentally, they're stuck much younger. So these are teens that need the supervision level of like a 5-year old.
Mhm.
And the world is not set up for teens who need supervision of 5-year olds. And sometimes they need 3-year old supervision. You have to like feel it out and see how they're doing. And so I understand that's why they're not successful in a lot of programs, because people aren't trained and expecting to provide that level of supervision and structure and all of that. But I think we need to build out capacity for more programming that's in the middle between the weekly outpatient and the intensive inpatient. So kids like ours don't have to be away from home. And it would be a significant cost savings to be able to have them in the community, as well as a more preferred option for attachment issues and other things. But also, like, if kids can get the skills that they need, then we don't have to do the expensive route of having the state involved, having the courts involved, having, residential placement. I mean, the costs for my guys they're very expensive for the state, and we're basically taking advantage of the only things that are available, and those are not the right options.
Right. And I mean, and piggybacking off of that, the in-state costs when it stays in state is expensive. But then when it
Mhm.
goes out of state, it is unbelievably
Yeah, I'm
expensive.
sure. I'm
And
sure.
so, yeah, factoring all of that in, it just seems to me and to you that those more local options would be vastly superior
Yep.
to the system we have in place.
Exactly. And what I would say to legislators is, yes, you have to invest up front, but the
Mhm.
cost savings over the course of these kids' lives will be very significant. I have calculated out the numbers, and as best I can estimate, and my kids have cost the state more than $1 million each, and
Mhm.
that's in their short lives. And we're setting up the one guy to be in and out of carceral settings for the rest of his life. That's going to be extremely expensive. Like, just invest in him, just work on rehabilitating him through something therapeutic. And it will be a significant cost savings if you can do that. So that's what I would try to say to legislators is this is an expensive route that we're taking, even by doing foster care in the very first place and removing him from his birth family. That's just an expensive route to take. And sometimes it's necessary and sometimes it's not. And so
Right.
we need to be really thoughtful about what services and supports we provide for all families, including families of origin, so that as many kids as possible can stay with their family of origin. Because if we invest in supports up front and that makes the difference so that families don't have to be separated, then you avoid the loss and the trauma and that attachment piece of it that really makes it complicated for kids like ours.
And it seems like if we had these local options in those situations where it is needed to remove from bio families for a number of reasons, it seems like maybe there could be a better plan at the beginning as
Mm-hmm.
well. Like we say, okay, hey, these kids have these struggles. There's these specific services we're gonna wrap around them right now,
Mm-hmm.
and then they grow up with those services kind of bracing them up in the hopes that as they develop further, we could begin to back them off as they develop those skills,
Yep.
rather
Yep.
than kind of what I'm assuming what you went through and what we've gone through in my household is searching and searching and searching, trying to find something, often failing. And then when you do find it, it's either too little too late or, yeah, it would have been extremely helpful 6 months ago. So now it might be mildly helpful, right? The bigger impact
Mm-hmm.
would have been 6 months ago. And
Yep.
so I feel like that's a great thing to kind of speak out on. Um, for parents that are in your shoes, our my shoes,
Yeah,
similar
definitely.
situations, what would you say to them? Those that are just like right in the thick of it, that are kind of approaching that rock bottom. What would you say to them?
I would say try and find community. So try and find other parents who have been through it. There's online support groups. I found those to be really helpful through Facebook. You can connect with people all over the country that are trying to navigate these systems for adopted kiddos. If the parents that are needing help are adoptive parents, that's one
Mhm.
thing that I would recommend that I found really helpful. Another thing that I found helpful are provider agencies that if you live in an area where you can get a place that offers multiple services under one agency. So for my kids, they got services through Child Serve, and that was great because they got mental health, occupational therapy, speech therapy, they have physical therapy all under one roof. And so the therapists can talk to each other and case coordinate, which was really helpful in kind of their elementary school years. That's when they went there. So I'd say if you have any providers like that that offer multiple services and can coordinate with each other, that can be really positive. If you can find anybody that's local that is navigating similar things or is even just open to kind of like I was describing earlier, just kind of being in community with your family, helping you out, even if it's you're still there, but you just have more adults coming along to help. I found that really helpful. So if there's people listening that are like, I wish I could help this family I know, ask them, see what you could offer to them. That was helpful to my family. It might not be to somebody else, but if you're asking them what do they need, they can probably maybe they just need meals, maybe they need childcare and you could provide it, maybe they need company. Just I would say reach out if you're somebody that's in their community that wants to help a little bit more.
I think case in point is I reached that point where I was reaching out and I just was
Mhm.
calling numbers I found on the internet. Hey,
Yeah.
I heard, and eventually my number got passed along to you, and out of the blue you called me back and we had an amazing conversation. And I think that's a great piece of advice for people who are going through it. It seems hard. to a lot of us in that moment. We, like you said earlier, we think nobody understands, and really
Yeah, it is
nobody that
hard.
hasn't experienced it truly does understand. But there
Yeah.
are those of us like you and me out there that we get it. If you don't want to talk too much about it, you don't have to, because we get it. If you
Yeah,
just want to
yeah.
sit in silence and hang out for a while, hey, we get it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's
that's
what I found helpful about the Facebook groups too, is that, then it's if you just want to ask a question, then you can get, 10 people that'll weigh in on it, which is really helpful. Or you can learn from other people that have posted things. And it's kind of like as you have time, you can look at those sort of things. And I found that to be more helpful than my local community in a lot of ways, because I was instantly able to find those people that understood and then have some resources through them.
yeah, I'm definitely have to get those groups, and then your support group that you organize, and put that on the website, so that just another avenue
Yeah, and
for people to.
if people are interested in the support group that I run, you are welcome to put my email address in your show notes, and they can
Okay,
just email me and I can send them the Zoom link for it. The only
definitely.
criteria is that you have to be involved with the juvenile courts in Iowa. We've had a lot of people reach out that have kids that have behavior issues that want to be a part of it. I really wish we could do a support group for that too. I don't know
Right.
of one, unfortunately. It's definitely needed, but this one we spent a lot of time talking about courts, so it's just for people that either have been involved with the courts in the past or are currently involved with the courts.
That sounds great, because having being someone who's gone through that to a lesser degree than you have, yeah, I could definitely see where people would want to debrief and talk about it, and just kind of feel heard and valued,
Yeah,
right?
it's hard to
Uh,
navigate. So,
Very much so, very much so. So last question: what gives you strength right now, after all this that you've gone through, all this that your sons have gone through? What gives you strength? What gives you hope? What pushes you to keep going on in your work with the mental health system, as both a profession and something you do on the side?
yeah. Well, I mean, here's the thing that I've learned is that once you understand trauma and the impact of trauma, then you see the whole world through a trauma lens. And I cannot unsee that now. So I see it and I have a lot of empathy for my kids because I see their behavior through a trauma lens. But I also look at everyone that I meet with that lens on and I think, like, what happened to this person? And I think that what gives me hope is that if more people can understand the impact of trauma, then we can live in community better with each other. We can have more patience with each other. We can have more compassion for each other. Now, with adults, it's harder because some of the behaviors are, I mean, we just can't excuse them, right? Like you may have a trauma history, but you got to work through your stuff. But I think, especially for kids, we really need to be thinking about it in terms of that trauma lens instead of what did you do? Thinking about like what happened to this kid, what's going on for this kid. And I think if we could do that, it would change the world.
No, I don't know if I can use that trauma lens on the guy that cut me off without using a turn signal earlier, right? My
Yeah.
road rage might win on that one. But yeah, no, children. I mean, I agree. I think with my own daughter and son, um, after you kind of work your way through your own trauma, and you can open up and view their actions through the lens of trauma, it does help. It helped me understand my
Mhm.
son a whole lot better. It helped me to let go of some of the anger and fear and frustration and all
Mhm.
those anxiety. It helped me to kind of just breathe and say, okay, some of the behaviors that he's had, they weren't targeted at me. They just
Yep.
happened.
Yeah,
They were
exactly.
a response that he didn't plan through. He didn't think through. Right. It wasn't a
Mhm.
malicious act. It was a cry for help. It was any
Yes.
number of other things. And so yeah, I think it's very important to kind of broaden our understanding. We talk about empathy, all right, a lot in character education, and it's very much tied to that. All right. Well, thank you for joining me today, Nina. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you. I look forward to talking again soon. We'll talk to you later.
Bye bye.
If Nina's story moved you, if you heard your own experience in her words, or learned something you didn't know, I want to ask you to do one thing today. Share this episode. Share it with a friend, with a legislator, with someone who still believes this isn't happening in Iowa. And if you're a parent, a provider, or someone living through this system, reach out. You are not alone. You can email me at chad@letstalkiowa.com or find more information at our website, letstalkiowa.com. Because this isn't just a podcast. It's the beginning of a conversation we've needed for too long. Stop staying silent. Let's talk Iowa. Let's keep going. Every share helps raise awareness, and every conversation starts with a story. Follow us on Facebook at Let's Talk Iowa and on Instagram at Let's Talk Iowa Podcast for episode updates, behind the scenes content, and ways to take action. Because truth changes policy, and Iowa families deserve better. Truth matters, families matter, you matter. Let's Talk Iowa. We'll see you next time. It's the beginning of a conversation we've needed for too long. Stop staying silent. Let's talk Iowa. Let's keep going.